weekend. Each man must do his bit.
Welcome to another edition of the Public Interest. My name is David Granger, and we continue our examinations of public policy in Guyana. And today we examine the question of rivers, which is a very important aspect of our policy, our identity, our existence. I mean, what would Guyana be without our waterways, without our waterfalls, without our wetlands, without our wildlife? Rivers and water form part of our identity. Everyone knows that the word Guyana itself is derived from an indigenous people's word, meaning land of waters. Some people say land of many waters, land of rivers, because of our creeks and rivers. And there are more than 60 rivers in Guyana. It might be a much larger number because when you check, there are about 6 rivers named Takutu alone. Our national song, the Song of Guyana, celebrates the land of great rivers. The national anthem applauds the rivers and plains. And even folklore. Folklore features tales of river-dwelling Masakura man, water mama. Children are afraid to go down by the river at night because of Masakura man or water mama. But rivers are part of our identity. Rivers dominate our lives to a greater extent than we imagine. Rivers denominate and demarcate and divide our administrative regions. Many of our administrators have, double titles, for example, Barima Waini, Mahaika Borbis, Potaro Siparuni, and even the Upper Demerara Borbis. That's region 10 is the only region which straddles Demerara, Essequibo, and Borbis. So rivers literally run through our blood, run through our veins, run through our arteries. All of the regions, all 10 regions are named after rivers. All 10 regions are named after rivers, and some of them are named after 2 rivers. From Barimo Waini in the north, right down to the awkwardly named Upper Takutu, Upper Essequibo. People prefer just to call it Rupununi, and Rupununi itself is a river. All of our capital towns are located by riverside. You just think of New Amsterdam, think of Linden, think of Bartica. What would Bartica be without, being located at the riverfront, that beautiful golden beach that you have the regatta every year? So rivers are not just functional bodies of water. They are part of our identity, part of our existence in Guyana. They're part of our life here in Guyana. And rivers too are important because most of them flow from south to north, and they empty in the Atlantic. 1 or 2, like the Coyone, seem to run sort of west to east, but most, even the Coyune and the Mazruni, flow into Essequibo, which runs northwards into the Atlantic. And our Essequibo, that great river, the mother of all rivers in Guyana, is about 1,014 kilometers long, which is greater than the distance between Guyana and Barbados. So you can imagine how long the Essequibo River is. It's greater than the distance between Guyana and Barbados. And the rivers are important too for strategic or geopolitical reasons. The border with Venezuela is defined by rivers, the Amacuro. The border with Brazil is defined by rivers, Ireng, Takutu. The border with Suriname is defined by rivers, the Kutari, Corentyne. Of course, the Surinamese seem to have a different definition of that border. And in August 1969, the Guyana Defense Force had to evict them from the New River. And the area between the New River and the Corentyne is about the size of Jamaica. That was the size of land that the Surinamese had been planning to occupy the new river zone, but it shows the importance of rivers, not only for uniting the regions of Guyana, but also for dividing us from our border neighbors. And of course, we want to make sure that we live in peace and we don't have to involve in conflict to define those borders. But the rivers define us, they shape the country geographically, historically, because don't forget our original three colonies, Demerara, Essequibo, and Berbice, which became our counties, Demerara, Essequibo, and Berbice, were named after rivers, Demerara, Essequibo, and Berbice rivers. So geographically, historically, and politically too, because eventually Guyana adopted not only the counties, but also the district system, which is defined by rivers. Rivers are important too because they're the sinews of our survival, transporting food and people from the hinterland to the coastland, and commodities from region to region. The early settlements by the Dutch were located along rivers, and they went upriver, ready for protection from the Spanish and the British, who were raiding. The Europeans always seemed to fight among themselves. And you might know that at the head of the estuary of these rivers, Essequibo, Berbice, and Demerara, there was something called a brandwhack. I think in Berbice you still have a brandwhack sari. A brandwhack is a sort of fire watch, and in those days before mobile phones, when the enemy ships would come, they would just light the fire, and the settlers upriver would see the fire, and they'd run inland, run away from the Spanish or the French or British or whoever was attacking them. So the brandwhack was an important part of the river culture. But rivers are also important for irrigation and for transportation. And if you're from Berbice and you sit on the bank of the Berbice River by Kalkuni or Kebbi, you'd see the Guyana's logs and bauxite heading north to the rivers. So the rivers were important for that purpose too. And our whole existence was, to some extent, governed by rivers. As I said, the nurseries of nature, because they created rich ecosystems. And the world's largest freshwater fish is found in our rivers, arapaima, and I hope people don't eat it out of existence. And fauna, and of course the world's largest lily, the Victoria lily, is a river lily. And our rivers host 490 species of fish, making them, an important zone of biodiversity. And as you know, the rivers provide entertainment and leisure at the time of regatta, those of you who've been to Bartica. And those of you who enjoy canoeing, boating in the rivers, it's also a way of ecotourism, of getting money from ecotourism, without getting money, of relaxing. So the rivers are very important. They fulfill fundamental functions in life. They have the personalized hygiene, in the hinterland, you bathe in a river, and housekeeping chores, bathing, cooking, drinking water, washing clothes, and to some extent they could be sources of energy. As you know, at one stage at Tumatumari, we actually had a functional hydropower scheme. So everybody speaks about hydropower, and there are potentially maybe about 300 or so places along rivers in Guyana, 300 years, which could have small or large hydropower schemes. But that's another matter, and we won't go into that now. But the potential for energy, the potential for leisure are all there in our rivers. So rivers are of great value. There's no dispute about that. And what I'm trying to say is that they're so important, we must protect them. All of us must be involved in protecting them. They're not just there as a showpieces. They're functional. They're beautiful. I mean, Guyana is a beautiful country, bountiful country. But we all have to understand the importance of rivers in order to make them work for us, make them part of the future so that our children could inherit them. Just as we inherited them from our parents and grandparents, we must be able to pass them on to our children. And rivers are important too for public administration, for communication, for integration and transportation. I mean, without the rivers, we would not be able to move a lot of our commodities. And from colonial times, this was recognized. River transportation, or the need for river transportation, called into existence something called the Transport and Harbors Department. You know, that department is 100 years old, I presume, TNHD. And that was a very powerful government department. It built dry docks. And at one stage, Guyana was able to make ships, build ships, sometimes even for the Caribbean, and build ferries. My recollection is that the Canty Pheasant might have been actually built in Guyana at a firm used to be called Sproston. So we built ferry boats, and we acquired ferry boats to work the rivers. We had to build stellings. Some of them are very old now and have to be repaired or replaced. The one at Bartica, I think, has been rebuilt. It looks like some international port now. The teenage, you had to build wharves, you had to manage harbors. They had to train seamen and pilots to bring ships in through the channels. They had to enforce regulations. And my friends, you know, every so often, you know, you find people dying on our rivers. There needs to be stricter enforcement. Rivers could be as dangerous as the roads, just as you can have traffic police to ensure discipline on the roads. You need traffic police to ensure discipline on the rivers as well. And the government at one stage used to launch services to go upriver to places like Kokwani, and you know, which before we were able to provide steamers. Of course, steamers were replaced by diesel engine boats, not by steam power boats. But the government actually had launch services, and some people in the rivers depended on the government launch service to get their mail or to get the sick members of the community to hospital. So the rivers were important, and from colonial times we understood the need for administratively and governmentally, for rivers. Rivers were natural routes for transport and travel. They nourished our agriculture. And if you know the five, I can call them conservancies, maybe you can call them water control schemes or flood control schemes. Five on the coast, there are five of them. In Region 2, there's the Tapakuma. In Region 3, there's the Buruseri. In Region 4, there's East Demerara Water Conservancy. And Region 5, there's the Mahika Maikoni Abari scheme. And Region 6, there's the Kanji scheme. So there are five coastal schemes, but they all depend on rivers. And without those rivers, we would not have the sort of sugar industry or rice industry that we've had over the last couple of centuries. So rivers are important to feed those conservancies, and those conservancies, of course, can release water, irrigation water, during droughts. They can store irrigation water during rainy season. Sometimes they overdo it a bit and cause floods. Rivers are also important because they brought into existence what is virtually a fleet of vessels, at least coming through the government of the day and the Transport and Harbors Department. And three river vessels which served us well, the Makauria, Malali, and Tarani. The biggest most beautiful ferries that we had. They came in the 60s. They were ordered by the British colonial government, and they were delivered later. They're named after creeks. If you check the gazetteer, there's a Macquarie Creek or river, there's a Turani, and there's a Malali, and these were bought. Um, they were designed by the colonial government before we got democratic government. They were designed, I think, by a firm in Scotland, and they were meant to service the three rivers. The Malali, Macquarie, and Turani were meant to service the Berbice, Demerara, and the Essequibo rivers. And again, those rivers represented at that time three counties. There were smaller vessels like the Candy Pheasant and the Powys, which did the run to the Barima Waini region. In those days, it used to be called the Northwest District. And some people say call it the Northwest District, although the name has been out of use for 40 years or so. And you may not know, some of the listeners may not know, that a major means of aviation transport up to the early 60s was by amphibious aircraft. And there was one particular workhorse called the Grumman Goose, and that could land in the water. And there was a ramp at Rheinveld, what is now occupied by the Guyana Defense Force Coast Guard. And it was amphibious. The Grumman was amphibious, so it would land in the water in the hinterland and bring passengers. Of course, they had to go to the boat to the aircraft by boats, and then they'd fly to Rheinveld or wherever they're going, and they'd land in the Demerara River, and then they could taxi onto the ramp at Rheinveld. So that was more important in the 50s than the Mary, which at that time was, of course, an American air base. So the Grumman Goose used the river for aviation purposes. So it is very important to remember, not historically, but the fact that it is still, the rivers are still a very important part of our existence. But rivers are not only beautiful, they're not only historical, they're not only administratively important. We have to be concerned as Guyanese about the integrity of our rivers. And to some extent, there's been a lot of recklessness. People take the rivers for granted. And reckless logging and mining, as they like to say, west of Fort Island, in those regions, those four regions, Barima Waini, Kuyuni Mazruni, Pamarun, Supunam, and Pamarun, sorry, not the Potaro Siparuni and the Rupununi region. Those four regions are sometimes victims of abuse. The rivers are victims of abuse by reckless loggers and miners. And I think those persons who might have traveled to the interior some years ago would be disappointed, to use a mild word, but be astonished at the damage that has been done to Guyana's beautiful rivers by deforestation and by discoloration of the waterways. In the 60s, you could scoop up a handful of water and drink it. Don't try that now. Don't try that now. There's a lot of turbidity and debris, floating in the rivers. Rivers are living features. You can have young rivers and mature rivers and old rivers. And rivers could die. So unless we care them, just as we care our old aunties and grandmothers, rivers could die. So it's very important that the rivers should be valued and not violated. And I think that is something we need to think about. Rivers are not there forever. They could be misused and abused, and this is what is happening in Guyana now. Unfortunately, some of them have been polluted and contaminated by mercury, and there are a lot of indigenous communities, really from the south of Rupununi, could tell you about the danger. And when pregnant women, drink water, river water, or bathe in river water, or cook with river water, which has been contaminated by mercury or other pollutants, it will have consequences for their children. This is no joke. This is no idle warning, and loggers and miners must be more careful, more prudent to make sure that the effluent from their operations should not get into the river system. And some of them are so bent on greed and pursuit of gold and diamonds that they don't care about the consequences. In fact, the Potaro River, which, as you know, is the source of the Kaichor, is badly polluted for several kilometers. And the Peruni River, some areas that are impassable. And even when I was campaigning, there were some areas of the Mazaruni. You got to get out of your boat and walk on land because of the accretion of sand from mining operations in those rivers. Those are great rivers, and I think some of the coastlanders need to take a trip and see how the rivers are being damaged and eventually destroyed. And when you see what's happening to the Potaro, which is the river on which the Kaichua Falls is located, you get very worried, very distressed. And this has been going on for quite a few decades. And the Cuyuni River, which comes out of Venezuela, discharges obnoxious and noxious waters into the Essequibo River. So rivers are of concern, not only to the environmentalists, but to the indigenous people and the people who are living in the hinterland, because they survive. Their survival depends on farming, and farming depends on water from the rivers. Disproportionately, more than the coastlanders depend on rivers, people in the hinterland depend on rivers. And you know what happened in August 1995, when the Omai gold mine, again in pursuit of profits, the Omai gold mine had the biggest catastrophe of any Guyanese river in any time of our history. Remember August 1995, Omai gold mine contaminated the Essequibo River, our greatest river. And over the last few months of this year, there have been about 7 fatal accidents on Guyana's rivers. 9 people have died. 9 people have died on our rivers so far for this year, and we're just in our 10th month. So you can see that the rivers are not playthings. People need to think carefully about the way they use the rivers, and including boat captains. And of course, you're talking about enforcement. Where do we go from here? The rivers are important, and if we are to preserve these rivers for grandchildren, and if we are to make our rivers safe, and of course, free them from this other pollution and contamination, there's much more than the central government and the regional and municipal council can do to keep our waterways free of pollution. Sometimes it is real shame to go along beautiful rivers and see, soft drink bottles floating, or bits of styrofoam floating, or coconut husk floating. And, when some speedboat, tries to dash through that river at 2 o'clock in the morning or 8 o'clock at night and runs into, floating coconut shells, that's possibly when accidents occur. So we need to have a collective responsibility, a sense of responsibility to protect this valuable resource, Guyana's rivers, which are so much a part of our history and our geography and our very identity. We need to limit and control or prevent absolutely the pollution of our rivers from discharges from farming, logging, and mining. The protection of our freshwater sources can give all of our citizens, not only hinterland citizens, we can ensure that the entitlement to a clean environment is guaranteed, because the Constitution guarantees that to them. We can ensure that communities have access to safe rivers. We can ensure the entire country, has access to this, to the use of this important resource, not only for mining and other economic purposes, but also for entertainment and leisure. But we have to protect our rivers. We need MARAD, the Maritime Administration Department of the Ministry of Public Works. We need the Marine Police of the Ministry of Public Security. And we need the Corps of Wardens. Quite frankly, I don't know if that unit has been abolished, but the Corps of Wardens was meant to be an auxiliary enforcement arm of the Ministry of Natural Resources to ensure compliance with environmental standards and to prevent deaths in those mining camps and logging camps. The Corps of Wardens was very important, and you need a Corps of Wardens who are trained by the police and armed and equipped by the police, but they have knowledge of the natural resource and environmental laws, and we need to strengthen those arms, MARAD and the Marine Police and the Corps of Wardens, so that they could ensure safety on our waterways. The Environmental Protection Act, the River Navigation Act, and the Water and Sewage Act, all need to be enforced rigorously to protect our waterways. There are people who dump sewage in the waterways. Yes, it's terrible. And there were times long ago when people would be holding competition to swim across the Demerara River. They can't try that now. So we need to be very careful, and we need to strengthen these enforcement arms, particularly the Marine Police. I don't even know how many boats they have now, and the Corps of Wardens, so that they can move on the surface of the water to prevent these terrible accidents. Rivers are becoming dangerous, and we must remember that in everything that we do, pursuit of wealth, we need to have, some understanding of what the people in the hinterlands need rivers for. Every day they need clean water, and we need to ensure that the RDCs and central government as well assume the responsibility for ensuring that these acts, the River Navigation Act, the Environmental Protection Act, and the Water and Sewage Act are enforced to protect our citizens. That's what laws are there for the people, to protect the people. So, my friends, today we speak about this precious resource, not as an environmental showpiece, not something to boast about, but as an important part of our existence, and much more than that, an important part of the future of Guyana. They have a function to fulfill to present and to future generations. Our children and grandchildren must be able to inherit the rivers which have defined this beautiful and bountiful country, the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. We need safe water from our rivers and our wetlands, and we need to ensure that there's enforcement on the part of central government and regional administrations to preserve this precious gift, this precious endowment, the rivers of Guyana, the land of many waters. Thank you, and may God bless you.
Let us cooperate for the young. Let us cooperate. together, see we do it right. Together can we do it? Yes, we can.
Each man must do his